This is the American Indians, indigenous peoples' truths. Justice for all, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. Hello, Leslie. How are you?
Hello, Jalito, Elder. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Before we start, we have to do our land acknowledgement.
Yep. Go right ahead.
So let's pause for a moment to acknowledge the traditional stewards of the lands that we reside on, especially their ancestors, descendants, and all indigenous people who live now and have ever lived on this land we call Turtle Island. Thank you.
All right. Leslie, we got a very interesting show tonight. This is our fireside chat. And I'll greet you, Osio, Taishu, Shadanalai, Alito, and Miigwech. Okay. So this is our fireside chat. We do this once a month, where we give you, the viewing audience, an opportunity to talk to us. So let me bring my guest in so you know who you'll be talking to tonight. Let's see. First of all, I've got my former executive producer of my radio broadcast when I was on Pacifica Radio out of Washington, D.C., David LOZELL Martin. And David is a very close friend of mine. He's a newspaper columnist. He's a famous author. He's written, 19 books?
13.
13 books. And he's a very spiritual man sometimes. He's my brother. David Martin, how you doing, man?
Very well, Jay. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight.
Absolutely. My next guest. Somebody getting ready to say something? Okay. My next guest is also a very good longtime friend. He is the president and CEO of the United Black Fund out of Washington, D.C. You've heard of the United Givers Fund. He is the CEO of the United Black Fund. And his name is Barry, I'm going to say it like they say, LENOIR. Barry LENOIR. Hey, Barry, how you doing, man?
Well, fine, Jay. Thank you so much. I have to correct you and modify what you're saying. My dad was from Alcoa, Tennessee.
Okay.
And nobody spoke French in Alcoa. Everybody spoke aluminum. So in Alcoa, my name is LENOIR. And you say anything else, they won't know what you're talking about.
And your grandfather was also the pastor of Alfred Street Baptist Church, right?
Baptist Church, Aldrich Atkins, Andrew Warren Atkins, rather, native Chickahominy from Charles City, Virginia. He was a pastor at the Alfred Street Baptist Church for 43 years, so the largest church in the African American community in the metropolitan area at that time. But certainly a man who was very devoted to the human cause.
Mm-hmm. And he did a lot of things. He led a lot of great things happened to the Black community there and other communities there because of his leadership and efforts.
A lot of things that happened in those times when segregation was abounded, and this is not that long ago, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things they did was they started their own high school because there were no Black high schools anywhere in the surrounding community surrounding Washington, D.C. So they started Parker Gray High School.
Right.
One of the schools that became a subject to the movie about the integration of schools and football teams in Alexandria. But those kids outside of Washington in those days would come to Washington, D.C. to go to school. So my mother, although born in Alexandria, graduated from Dunbar High School in Washington, and my uncle, her brother, graduated from Armstrong. So it's a lot there, but eventually they took it upon themselves to organize and set up their own school system. And a lot of people are still around who benefited from that effort.
Absolutely. You're talking about the T.C. Williams High School. Remember the Trojans, right?
That's right. That's
the Titans.
That's a movie, yeah. It's perfect to be with you, Jay.
Absolutely, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And as a matter of fact, the coach of that team that made that movie famous was Coach Boone. He was a very good friend of mine until he walked on into glory.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now the third party here. Oh, is Ramon Grimaldi.
Oh, Lord.
And Ramon is actually my chief engineer, executive producer, and a whole bunch of other things that I can't mention on television or radio.
Thank you.
And we've been knowing each other for years and years and years. You could tell. Look at all that gray hair and his beard. Hey, bro, how you doing, man?
OCO, my brother, how are you? And may I say I'm also a proud current member of the Alfred Street Baptist Church under the leadership of Pastor Howard John Wesley, who I love infinitely. I haven't learned so much about faith in all of my 66 years. And Jay, you and I are stable mates of Pastor Wesley because he's on Radio 1 also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And last but not least, you know, you always save the best and the sweetest for last, right?
Oh, you're just saying that.
I say it to you all the time. Don't start.
I'll pay you later.
Is Les Fry, and she is the executive producer of my television show, Winter Nightwolf Live. And she's Choctaw, and what's the other one?
We are, on my father's side, we are Catawba, but we were pushed into the Cherokee Nation during the Great Walk. So
yeah. So anyway, how you doing tonight, Leslie?
I am doing well. Been doing very well. Busy, but doing very well. And can I say to our audience members, you can start asking your questions now. The panel is waiting for your questions. No question is too ridiculous. And you know, if you really want to gain some knowledge, you've got some very interesting and knowledgeable people sitting on this panel this evening. So you best be bet to get in your questions right now.
Okay, how can they do that? Can you tell them how to do it?
Yes, feel free to just type in the chat wherever you're viewing, be it YouTube, Twitch, or Facebook, and we'll be able to receive those messages and be able to answer those messages for you, answer those questions for you.
So before we get started with the questions, I want to kind of, since I've already harassed Ramon, David Martin.
Yes, sir.
You want to tell folks how we met, or do you want me to lead in?
Oh, I wouldn't dream of stepping on your lines. Go for it.
I read an
I
interesting.
won't even correct you when you get it wrong.
Okay, thank you. That's a first. But anyway, there was an article in the Washington Post years ago when you wrote, was it Facing East from Rushmore?
Facing Rushmore, yeah.
Facing Rushmore. And the article wrote about how great a book this was on Native history. And I said, okay, let me call the Washington Post. So I called the Washington Post and I called and I said, I need to get in touch with this guy. Well, who is this? Winter Nightwolf. Oh, the guy on the radio? Yeah. I need to get him for an interview. He says, okay, I don't think he'll mind. Here's his telephone number. So I call you and you agreed to come on the show. So you came into the studio that night, not knowing what to expect. And we had a very interesting conversation. So at the end of the show, David Martin turned the tables on me. He says, now I want to ask you a question. I said, what's that? I'm a white guy. So how can you call me your brother throughout this whole broadcast and whenever we talk? After all of the stuff that my people did to your people in the past. And I looked at him. I said, well, David, I tell you, I can't hold you responsible for what your ancestors did to my ancestors in the past because you were not there. And I know your heart. I know you. Just like you can't hold me responsible for what my people did to your people in retaliation for what they did to us. And you looked at me and says, well, I wasn't expecting that answer. Remember, David?
I do remember. And that's always one of the things that appeals most to me about you, but about your programs and the way you cover things. You always talk about the human family. And I think if all of us talked about and considered the human family rather than the separate branches of the human family, we'd probably get along better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a hard lesson to learn, though, for some of it.
Yes, it is. So, Barry Lamont. Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off like that.
That's okay. We got questions coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and start asking these questions. They're coming in very quickly. We have a really big, long question right now from Gabrielle Shoshone. And she's asking, as my family historian and genealogist, we have done some of the DNA testing with companies that yield results that we have Native American ancestry, but it doesn't say what nation we belong to. Has your panel had any insight on the creation of testing companies specifically for people with descendants of Native Americans, but want to know the specifics around the tribes? My family comes from the Great Falls, South Carolina, which is Catawba country. We don't want to assume, and I think her question got cut off because it was long, but I kind of got the gist of the question. So before I answer, does anybody else want to answer that question?
I'll take a shot at it. Gabrielle, my sister, how are you? My mother's side of the family is from South Carolina. And my mother's side of my family are Cherokee. But there was also Catawbas down there in that area too. So a lot of these companies that are doing these DNA testings don't really dig deeper or far enough and to give you the kind of answers that you're looking for as far as tribal affiliation, names of your people and all of that. So anybody want to add to that?
I do. Oh, go ahead, Ramon.
No, go ahead, Les. It's you. Go ahead.
No. You go ahead and then I'll wrap up.
I would just refer back to a show a couple of weeks ago. I would suggest, Gabrielle, that you contact the American Indian Society, and they can be of help to you also in better testing and narrowing down a little bit more of your heritage. But don't be dissuaded by any of it, because some of the greatest leaders in Indian country, especially the Tyaks, always said, only an Indian can recognize an Indian. So don't worry about it as much. Don't get psyched out about it as much, because as Jay always says, it's how you treat my heart. But that's also where nativism resides. It's in your heart. So, find out what you can, but don't be guided by trying to find so much about what you can about what you are that you don't assume what you're supposed to be.
Leslie?
And for me, Gabrielle, I would just say that a lot of us who are experiencing are part of the Black experience are in the same predicament that you're in. The best way that I can tell you as far as your DNA testing and stuff like that is look at all of the census records, look to see if they tried to put themselves on the Dawes roll and under what name they put themselves on the Dawes roll. And that also could be very misleading sometimes, because as a Catawba, the Catawba Nation was very small at that time, and so they didn't recognize them as one of the 5 civilized tribes. They lumped them into the Cherokee Nation. It was not until I came across other documents that stated that we were Catawba. So I just say keep doing your research. And the one thing that I have found that has been very beneficial for me is once I did find out who my people were, I then went in and I decided to immerse myself with other societies, other communities that embraced me so that I could learn more about my people. And I hope that it helps you. That question helps you.
I'll add something to it. If you have, in my family, we had a few names to go by. And we were very interested in finding out my grandfather's brothers and sisters and his entire, his genealogy record. And we came across a site called WikiTree, WIKITREE. And at that site, there are people on board who will help you search your genealogy record. In fact, someone who worked with me was able to come up with the names of all of my grandfather's brothers and sisters, and their extended families, and also his parentage. So if you have names of people in your family that are still tribal, that are more directly related to the tribe, you might try the site WikiTree to see if you can get someone to help you look through the records and help you find more about your family and its heritage.
I got something to add to that too. Gabrielle, back in the late 1700s, 1800s, and even into the 1900s, people kept their birth records. They recorded the birth of a child in their Bibles. And everybody had a Bible back then, I think. So if you can find your family Bible or find who has taken the possession of that Bible in your family, go back and trace through the birth records. They didn't get these birth records like the vital statistics. When a child was born, the child's name was written there, the date of birth was written there, and what part of wherever it is, South Carolina, they were born. That will help you. That's how you start your genealogy. And if you can find family names, I don't know where you live, but if you ever get a chance to come to Washington, D.C., go to the archives, and you can go in those archives and look up family names, parts of the country, and that type of thing. And instead of paying somebody a ridiculous amount of money to go do the same thing that you can do, try doing it on your own. Get a start somewhere. Oh, and you're local. Okay, so you live in Capitol Heights, no problem. After the show, Leslie, my executive producer, will send you my telephone number, and we can talk. I'll do what I can to help you, but there are other people out here that can also help you.
Gabrielle, you can send me an email at cliffdyeproductions, that's all one word, cliffdyeproductions@gmail.com. And then the other thing too I want to say is GEDmatch, in addition to piggyback off of what Barry said, GEDmatch, which is DED Match, is also a good resource, and it is free. You don't have to pay for the full loan out subscription, you can also actually use that too to help you find relatives. A lot of people who can't afford Ancestry go on there and put on their family information. But there are free resources out there to help you on your journey.
And they will not take advantage of you, because I know if you do a search with Ancestry.com, whatever they find, they own that. You can own that.
But the thing with GEDmatch, I will say this, is that in order for you to get a better fleshed out background of who you came from, you do have to upload a DNA test. I will say that. So you have to initially pay for the DNA test, and then you can upload your results to GEDmatch, and they should be able to give you people within your family members who are not able to afford the subscription that Ancestry requires for you to have. Okay, we have another question. This is from D. Mills. Do you feel the Baptist Church played a major role in reclassification, and why is there no mention of the plantation treaties and acts as well as merchant treaties? The Negro Act reclassified hundreds of thousands of people.
Well, first of all, D, you cannot blame that on the Baptist Church. If you're looking for a place to point a finger, you have to point to the Roman Catholic Church, because they came over here with no goodwill or anything to help Indian people. When they came here, they were determined to take everything that we had here before they came here. And somebody asked me, well, why did these white people come over and kill you? I said, because we were where God put us, and they wanted what we had. Now, as I've always said, and I got to do this disclaimer, all white people are not bad, just like all black folks and Indians are not good. Dr. King said, judge me not by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. That's the measurement that I use. But to get back to what you were talking about, there is simply too much hate in this world. We seem as though all we can do is hate each other. And we know those other folks, those fools that follow behind the former president, never be president again. We knew that hate was always here, but he pulled the cover off of it. And we can't allow ourselves to fall into that mode of hate. And the reason I say that, one reason in particular, this planet that we live on, if we don't do something about climate change and cleaning up this planet, in 50 years, none of us will be able to inhabit this planet, man, animal, or anything. So we should be more concerned about how we're going to get along and what we can do to clean up Grandmother Earth so that we can manage to survive. Anybody else got anything to say?
I have
Go ahead.
a comment, and I'll apologize before I say it because it's a little insensitive or controversial to ask this. But I've always wondered, considering the horrific history of Europeans coming into this country and what happened to the native people who lived here, why is there such a premium on the part of so many white people to claim Indian ancestry? They seem to have flipped it on the back of the way we treated Native Americans. And I'm not just talking about Elizabeth Warren, who may have done it for career purposes, but I'm telling you, just in the white community generally, if someone says, oh, I'm part Indian, I'm 1/16th Cherokee or something, it's with a great deal of pride. When did that switch about come, and why?
That started back with the $5 Indian.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, well, let me tell you. When Europeans were advancing west, a lot of them didn't have sufficient food to eat to take care of their families. So they buddied up to the Indian agents for the reservations out west. And they said, look, I'm white just like you, but my family's starving. What do I have to do to get some of all those supplies that you got for those Indians? And they would say, give me $5 and I'll give you a card and you can get an allotment of food. That's what it was. That's where that whole thing started. The $5 Indian. And they continue with it even today.
Well, can I disagree with you?
Sure. I know where you live.
I believe that $5 Indian was true then, but the current desire to be proud of an Indian ancestry, which may or may not be there, followed the whole history of, taking Native American kids and putting them in school, cutting their hair, telling them they can't speak their language. So that reflects a certain hatred for those people, or fear, or displeasure, or distaste. And that seems to have changed now, where there's a pride there. And I'm fascinated with that. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Yes, Leslie.
I'd like to address that. I think that everybody wants to be a part of the in crowd. And let's just face it, being a Native American means that you really have true ownership to this land, that you are a true story, that you have something that actually goes back, that justifies you, or actually justifies the past, the history of the horrific history of that. It is, it's a badge of honor to have come from the indigenous or from the original people that lived here, to say that you're a part of that. And because so many Europeans that came here and committed the atrocities that occurred, it's like they want to separate themselves from that past, from that history, and say or claim that they're Native American. But I will say this, as somebody who is researching their Native American history, and it is an ongoing process, they're willing to wear that badge of honor, but they're not willing to do the work. They're not willing to go through the history. They're not willing to go through the suffering. They're not willing to ally themselves with the community and to explain that, or to even rectify some of the past. They're not willing to do any of that. And just like many Europeans who have come over here, what they do is they appropriate. They appropriate our race. They appropriate our food. They appropriate our clothing. This also happens within the African American community, because I believe that there is a loss or a sense of identity when it comes to Europeans who have come here to America. And so therefore they want to embrace that and say that it's their own, just so they can have a sense of being.
I'd add this thought too. To a certain extent, I think the Native American culture has been romanticized. Yes. In film and media and particularly in the world, the art world. And it's not just recent. This has long been the case that the figure of a Native American in the West riding horseback, chasing the buffalo and living its life has always been attractive to people. But the romanticizing of the Native American has not changed the experience of the Native American in this country. The experience of the Native American is still a subject of horror. And so let's not be fooled about the idea that people are interested in the culture and the display of Native Americans, but disinterested in the everyday life and the trials and tribulations of Native Americans experience. And I had to get this together in my own thoughts. The brutal treatment of Native Americans in the 1800s preceded this wave, the tsunami of immigration into the country. Between 1880 and 1920, about 20 million Europeans came into the country. They're completely unrelated, unconnected to the experience of blacks in slavery, for example. The Civil War had ostensibly, at least on paper, ended that experience. And between 1864 and 1880 or 1890, when people came to this country in droves, the people coming had no experience whatsoever with Africans in slavery. They had very little experience with the plight and the brutalization of Native Americans. So when you look at that, it's hard for them to be connected and supportive of what, where we're coming from, let's say. And then this is also displayed on the Supreme Court, where you have 2 or 3 first-generation Americans coming from Europe who've ascended to the Supreme Court from various cultural backgrounds. And when it comes to issues like affirmative action and the like, they're completely insensitive. They don't understand why Native Americans or Latinos or Chinese, or Asian Americans, or Black Americans are demand that special attention, special effort be made to remediate the historical experience of slavery, brutal oppression, and the like. So the idea that people are attracted to the nobility of the Native American experience is not surprising, because they have no connection to the disastrous, brutal, attempt to annihilate and eliminate Native Americans that took place from 16-something through last week.
Can I also, I want to piggyback on that, because we do need to move on to other questions. We have several questions right here in our queue, but I wanted to address Dee Mills's comment about the Baptist Church playing a role in the reclassification. They're not the sole culprit here. This was an agenda that was governmental, and it was to make sure that we were placed in some type of a caste system, and they were just doing what the government told them to do. So I don't want to place entire blame on any of the churches. A lot of churches did good, but reclassification was a deeper, more covert agenda by our government. So let's just want to say that.
It was also the Walter Pleckers and people of that ilk of this world that really started the reclassification. And what happened was, in an attempt of not only genocide physically, but genocide of culture, everybody who was a Native American, you were stripped of your native name. You were given another name, just like slaves were. And on your birth certificate, you were classified as Negro. And Walter Plecker and people of that ilk said that was the final way of genocide to get rid of Native Americans in this country, was classify them as Negro.
That was in Virginia, as I understand, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes, it was. All right, so we have a question from Braveheart. Are any of you familiar with Dane Calloway's work in regard to the American Negroes being Aboriginals of America? Information is amazing. We are very familiar with Dane Calloway. So does anybody want to speak to that about Dane?
No, I have nothing to say about him.
All right.
Or his philosophies.
Here's the thing. Everybody is doing their work as far as informing people about the Aboriginal American here. My question is, if you find his information interesting, do more research as well. You know, even in this panel, this is not the last word tonight. Keep and continue to do your research and know your truth. Know your truth about who you are and your people. I'm not going to knock the man for telling his side of the truth. Okay? But I will say, do your own research. I understand that he has a lot of followers, and I applaud that. But even to all of his followers, do your own research. Do not take his word as bond, or even our word as bond. Do your own research.
And you can also say one thing that'll sum it all up. You said that the writings were amazing, and yes, they are. But I will tell you, it's covered under one word. It's his story. You know, anytime somebody comes up with something that in depth, with that kind of research and putting that kind of push and panache behind it, that's his story. But the thing you really want to find in the end is the story.
Well said.
Well said.
All right. So this is Zion Law. Which nations or tribes were in Steubenville, Ohio, Virginia, and Tennessee before the 1900s? Thank you.
Let me see. The Battle of Falling Timbers. I can't remember right now, but you need to look that up. Those were the tribe, those people in Ohio. And before, what date was it again?
Before 1900.
Cherokees had migrated from North Carolina, South Carolina, and parts of Virginia into Ohio, into the Ohio Valley. Now you're gonna make me dig into my brain, which has been locked up for a few minutes now, and find this is no, it's not embarrassing. It's just that I got CRS and I can't say that on the air. Can't remember
Stuff.
yes stuff. But on a serious note, look up the battle of falling timbers, like trees, falling timbers. And you'll find a lot of truths in that, as well as just look up the tribes of the Ohio River, and that'll also give you some more information. And I promise you, the next time we come back on here with the Fireside chat, save that information for me, Leslie. I'm going to have that information for you. Okay. I'm sorry, getting old, can't remember nothing.
And to put a bad joke here, I can tell you from some of my ancestry as Italian Sicilian, I can tell you my people were there at that point because Steubenville, Ohio is where Dean Martin was from.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Well, everybody loves somebody sometime.
Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness. All right. So let's look at this. Marina Hernandez. She said, my parents are from Mexico and I have deep roots to Pame, which is Mayan. She doesn't actually have a question, but she's making a statement. Okay. Thank you so much for those comments about agreeing. Let's look at this again. Black Hawk says that we must seriously drop the term Black as an identifier, distance entirely from our Indian identity. I think all kinds of nomenclatures do when other people have identified you. But the thing is, it's going to be very hard to get that out of our culture because it starts with you, actually, Brave Hawk, by saying that you are someone who's living the Black experience or something like that, or saying that you are of indigenous or Aboriginal heritage. You're the one that has to start saying that because you have to change the method in which people identify you. But it has to start with you. To do it all the way, to make it a governmental rule or whatever, you're going to be waiting a long time, baby, for that to happen.
That's
but
right.
There are people that identify that because people identify with that name Black because they don't know any better. And the most important thing is to educate people. Right now, people embrace that name, that title. They embrace that word because they think that that is who they are. So you have to start with educating people first about who they are, who their people are, and then we can start talking about changing names.
Okay, can we take a 2 or 3 minute break and come back?
Absolutely. We'll be right back after this.
Okay.
Please keep your questions coming, you all. Thank you.
All right.
on the radio, you all. You can listen to him on Sunday nights. Can you give us the call sign, Ramon?
Yeah, it is WOL 1450 AM.
All right.
And Barry, we will see you Sunday at 6 p.m., where we're going to chop it up real good on some of the history of the United Black Fund.
That'd be great. Looking forward to it. We've got a lot of history to talk about.
And may I say,
I'm sorry, if
Go
you're
ahead,
not
Lex,
in
go
the
ahead.
DC area, where can we find you online?
WOLDCnews.com and hit the listen live button.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm going to say something that's always unpopular, and I always get flack to the point of even have had physical altercations. But I remember vividly at the 1970 Democratic Convention, it was on ABC News, where Jesse Jackson came up and looked straight into the camera and said, "We want to be called African American." And I remember saying, "Hold up, wait a minute. There's a voting rights thing that's in error, because I wasn't asked for that vote about what we want to be called." And I've always taken exception to it, because I think in a lot of ways it's disrespectful. Because Barry, as you said, the influx of 20 million Europeans coming in here around the turn of the century, you always knew there were French Americans, Irish Americans, Polish Americans, German Americans. There were always Americans from what country they were from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they did to me, that almost smirked of a George Wallace and the other people, send them all back to Africa. Now, in Salt Lake City, Utah, the Mormons love keeping data, and they know where our origin was down to the country and the area. So be nice enough to call me a Senegalese American or something else like that, and then I'll decide what I want to be after that. But just don't throw me in a continent and think that's good enough.
I think that the reason why he did that, and it's because I don't even know why he decided that he was going to give us that term, but I guess he felt that this was giving us a sense of belonging, and separating us from the word black, which meant bad or evil or whatever. And so he decided to give us that word, African American. But I'm neither one of those things, and that's the thing. I will be so glad when this country allows us to identify as who we really are and not by name. But we also know that that's tied into economics. It's tied into, your class. It's tied into so many things in this country, being black, white, Asian, or whatever. So it's just sad,
I'll take a little different track on this. I think part of it is simply custom. When Jesse Jackson spoke about African Americans, I recall at the time there was a great surge of interest in my community about Africa, about the newly emerging nations in Africa. There's a great deal of hope and enthusiasm about what was going on. People like Stokely Carmichael had connected with the African leadership, eventually moving to a country in Africa. So part of it was had some kind of Pan-African kind of enthusiasm that people had during those times. And African American beat the heck out of some of the other terms we referred to each other by, and we referred to by others. But there's a custom. When I lived in Cincinnati, Ohio at one time, and then a relatively mixed integrated community, and moved to Dallas, where the N-word was customarily used in the black or African community. And it caught me by surprise, because in Ohio, if somebody used that word, it was usually someone of another race. But these practices and customs are as someone has said already, very difficult to engage and change. What I think we have to encourage is the connection with a larger sense of group, a larger sense of and this, we're human beings. And location defines some. I'm a native Virginian. I'm a Native American. I'm native to Tennessee. These are locational references, but we're human beings. And the idea is, as Leslie said, that we have to begin to express our larger self and not our smaller self. And race defines one aspect of you, but it certainly doesn't capture hardly any of the things, as Jay said, the content of your character, which I think ultimately is what we look to as a source of definition, self-definition.
We often get on this show people asking why we use the terminology Black or African American, and I want to kind of address that. This show is for the purposes of educating people. Those terms are terms that are identifiers of Black people who are of a darker melanated complexion that are living the Black experience here in America. This is how they identify themselves. We're here to educate you and let you know that you are not Black, that Black, white, and any other race that was that term is a new term, and it was used as a classification. But a lot of us are not educated about that. And before we even get to the point of explaining not identifying somebody as Black, we have to explain why it's important not to identify yourself as such. And then for you to embrace it as an audience. If you already know that you're not Black and that's a term that's given to you or a name that is not who you really are, good for you. But we're here to educate people on that so that they don't identify themselves as that. They find out who they are, and then they can identify themselves as who they are.
Well said.
When people ask me, what are you? I said, well, I'm Cherokee, I'm Shoshone, and Taino. Well, where'd you get that from? Well, on my father's side, my grandfather was a Shoshone, and his wife, Sylvia Robles Cruz, was a Taino from Old San Juan, Puerto Rico, and my mother's people are all Cherokees from South Carolina. So I know who I am. And thank God I've lived long enough to be able to know that. There was a young lady that asked a question a little while ago about the tribes from Ohio. I'm going to give you the names right now.
There was a gentleman.
Gentlemen.
Go ahead.
The Shawnee came from Ohio, the Chippewa, the Ojibwe, the Delaware, the Wyandot, the Eel River Indians, EEL, and the Iroquois Confederacy was part of the people in Ohio. So I just wanted to share that information with you.
And those of us, my brothers and sisters on here who are Aboriginals, it's good to name yourself Aboriginal. Understand that also is a name that was given to you by a colonizer, but what people are you from? If you're Aboriginal, what people are you from? That's just my question to you. So you could claim to be Aboriginal, like I could claim to be Black or African American or Asian, but who are your people? That's who you are from. So we have a question right here from Dustin Stevenson. I believe the Negro Act of 1740, created by Honorable William Bull and Commissioner of British Indian Affairs, reclassified thousands of 4 ethnic groups, Negroes, Indians, mulattoes, and mestizos, are now Negro slaves. This act had the creation of the pass system, which was used into the Indian Act, needing a pass to get off the reservation. This act lasted, I believe, from 1740 to 1865. We have a disconnect from this act. Many, many doctrine stories. I believe there are many tribes written as Negroes when they were actually, I believe he was going to say, probably indigenous.
Okay, let's go back to Dr. Arthur Plecker of Virginia. Arthur Plecker was a pure-blood racist, and he would not allow any man or woman that was native to have a baby and say that they were Indians. He reclassified a lot of people, and that was the beginning of paper genocide in America. If you had a child, let's say from 2 Virginia Indians, you couldn't have that on your birth certificate. You were classified as mulatto, colored, or Negro, period. So that was the beginning of paper genocide. You know, folks, you need to really study this stuff and stop taking what somebody tells you is true. If you haven't checked it out for yourself, then don't claim it. When Europeans came here from Europe, they didn't come here as white people. They came here as Germans, British, French, and on and on and on. But somebody had the grand idea that for power and land grabbing, if we would come together under one umbrella, and they called it white.
Elder, can I just say something too about that? Let's talk about the Irish that came here from Europe. They were classified as black. They were classified as black.
I was getting to that.
So were the Poles and Italians.
Okay. But I will tell you this, that if you have the opportunity and the good fortune to visit places like Ireland or Italy or Sicily or even Spain, and you call those people white, you got a fight on your hands. Because the people from Spain and Italy and places like that, the first thing they're going to tell you is that I'm Northern African. Where'd you get white BS from? I'm not white, I'm Northern African. And if you go to Italy or Sicily and pull that stuff, you might not make it back home in one piece. And that's true of like Egypt. Egypt is not white. You go to Ireland, they're not white. They'll tell you in a minute, I'm Irish. Where did you get that white crap from? Did you know that when the Irish came over here, they came over here as slaves? You don't want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you what. The difference in a slave and an indentured servant, there is no difference. They just use a nicer way of saying it for the light-skinned people that came out of Ireland. I had a good friend growing up, and his grandfather owned Hagen Plumbing Supply. I used to play with him when I was a little boy, right in Washington, D.C. And his grandfather had some signs behind his desk, and we pulled them out and looked at it. And the sign says, Irish need not apply. You're talking about racism within that European set mindset? My African brothers and sisters, my Native brothers and sisters, and my Asian brothers and sisters, don't get your drawers tied in a knot behind that, because we weren't the only ones that they discriminated against. They discriminated against their own people. All right, I'm finished.
I want to say too,
and Monaga, nice comment.
Yeah, very nice comment. I will say this, that also, if you look at any depictions of Irish people in England, and when they came here to the America, they drew them as monkeys.
Yeah.
I'm just saying. So believe you me, it was all about your caste system and your class system. And anybody that came here from Europe that was not of British ilk or came here from the descendants of the Plymouth Rock, the Pilgrims or whatever, they were classified as black or less than. And even Germans were made slaves when they came here. There is plenty of information out there. You can see newspaper articles where they actually were putting them on a slave box and selling them. So we're not the only one who experienced that as people who were not of indigenous heritage, or people who were black. And I will say this too. We went through a genocide in the census. If you look at a census record, the census record classified us as either mulatto, mestizo, slave or non-slave, and then it changed in I believe the early 1700s to start saying black and slave or black and free. We went through a genocide through our census. Take a look at that from the 1600s to now.
Jay, I think it's so important that in your show that you're concentrating on language, because people think it's an academic or just a frivolous topic, but who controls the language controls the culture.
Mm.
And these kind of discussions are really mind-opening. What Ramon said about African American, it had never even occurred to me. If a person from Nigeria came over here to this country, we would not call him a Nigerian American. We would call him an African American, even though if someone came over from Germany, we would call him a German American. We wouldn't call him a European American. And that distinction in language is so important to understand and to get into your head.
Okay.
Zion Law says that his mom was from Steubenville, Ohio. She grew up with Dean Martin. Her mom was Indian. The government put Negro on my grandmother's birth certificate and left her mom's race blank. How do I correct it? You actually have to go to court to do that, by the way. Sorry to say.
That's right.
You have to go to court to change an official document like that.
And it can be done.
Oh yes.
But it's going to cost you some money. But if you got somewhat of a legal mind, you could find out how to do it yourself and write the order to the judge and tell him, sign this. Here's the proof of who I am. Ramon, you did it.
Yeah, my name was incorrect. So my first name for 60 years was not Ramon. It was Lewis as my father. But I had it changed because it was never meant to be that way. But it was a mistake by Georgetown Hospital where I was born. So I went my whole life. I've always been Ramon Grimaldi. It's on Social Security card. It's on my draft card. It's everywhere. It's on my credit. The only place it's not was my birth certificate. And then when I moved here to the great dominion of Virginia, these idiots decided that they would not honor my birth certificate with Ramon Grimaldi on it. So I had to go through all the machinations to get it changed. And I found out when I went to Vital Statistics in DC and got my father's birth certificate, who was Ellis Island from Sicily on his father's side and Naples on his mother's side, that his birth certificate from Queens, New York said that he was colored. I laughed so hard, the guards came over. They thought something was wrong with me.
No, ain't no way in the world Louis Grimaldi was colored. He was a Sicilian, and I will tell you something to his honor. He worked for the Heck Company as a manager, and he was the first person that was not black that brought people of color into management positions, and that's how our Heck Company got to be integrated. Your father, Louis Grimaldi, and he sold me my first sofa.
And a bunch of other stuff.
Okay, let's just once again, Black Hawk. He says our skin isn't black. We know that. We know that, Black Hawk, Brave Hawk. We know that. We are not black. We know that. But for the purposes of how America had to identify us, that's how they classified us as black. But we are definitely not black people. We know that. We are not void of color. We're full of color. So I just want to address this issue right here too. Go ahead, Elder.
Brave Hawk, if you're so dissatisfied with people of color being called black, why don't you go and tell the white man that put that in place and get him to straighten that out instead of, coming to us? We can't do anything about it. Go to the one that started it and you demand that he change that.
I mean, the only thing that we can do is to educate people about who you are, who you really are. As far as changing your nomenclature, that's kind of hard to do.
Brave Hawk, if you want to take that walk, I'll walk behind you. I'll walk with you. If you want to take that walk and have it changed, I'm with you.
I would too.
And I think you can't let people refer to you as, define who you are. And the idea that we are defined by a color of our skin, whatever the color is really right. It's kind of shallow. We the historical reference of being black or white is something we, as you said, we just need to leave behind and step away from.
Yes,
At the same time, sociopolitically, there's a need for us to identify with our common interest and our common experiences. And what we call ourselves is secondary to what we do about the issues we're concerned about. So I'm saying that we can stress over the word Black or African American. I think going back to Jackson's thing, Jesse Jackson had in mind. I think people who had some ancestry in slavery, not a Nigerian who comes to America, or not someone from Senegal who comes to America, but people who had some kind of connection in their ancestry with slavery as an African American. But that's really neither here nor there if we don't ever get together, organize ourselves around those things we have in common, our common interest, and execute, an effort to change those things that need changing. And so we could, it's like about the great organizations over time that have addressed issues of humanity. I think one of the greatest terms I've heard for an organization is people united to save humanity. It doesn't characterize what the organization is doing or did, but it does suggest a concept that I think that draws me to an understanding of it's more than me and more than mine that I should be concerned about, and that the steps I take, the effort I make, has to do with pushing all of us in the direction that I think is right, like that.
And then I'm going to be the first one to put my color down as cafe au lait. So this is the thing. This is very interesting too, because I do want to address Tom Jones's comment right here. Yes, you are absolutely correct, Tom. There were many people who are classified as African American that never had slave heritage. They were not slaves. They did not come here as slaves. They did not come here in shackles. Many of us did not come from that experience. Many of us didn't. And if you believe that, you need to educate yourself, because there were free men and women of color that came here to America to make a way, to start a business and everything like that. Mm-hmm. I, for one, am one of those individuals. My heritage, my great-great-grandparents and stuff were not slaves. However, they did marry people who were of descendants of slaves. And so there's where you get the mix up. But that's not our primary origin. It was not our primary origin to come here in servitude or slaves. A lot of us came here as free men and women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you can make that same distinction, and I tell that to people and they don't necessarily like it, but I say there is a distinction when you talk about an African American and the case of Tom with his question there. And I always refer to Barack Obama, and I say, you know what? He married an African American, but he is not really an African American. He's an American African, and there is a chasm of difference between the two.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, because we would not, if we went to Africa, we would not fit in. We have not lived that experience, and when Africans come here, they're now learning about that experience. They're shocked if somebody calls them the N-word or calls them Black, because they've never lived our experience.
And the thing about it is, and I think, Barry, you made reference to it with people trying to get in touch with the Pan-African spirit and everything. I knew a lot of people in the African embassies when I was a kid and when I was in my teenage and 20s. And I remember one time vividly, Marion Barry, rest his soul, and I'm sorry I got to tell this on you, Marion, but he was on TV one time and my African friends were looking and they were laughing. And I'm like, what are you laughing at? Why doesn't your friend realize that the clothing he wears is for a female, not a male? And the last said, well, it's just the man trying to make a point and get in touch. We don't know the nuances yet because we haven't been exposed to enough education to know. Maybe that's why you're here.
And that's why I can't get down with Kwanzaa. I just can't. I can't get down with that because it's not my heritage that I identify with. I think for the purpose of people wanting to learn about that, that's something that we created that was our own here in America. They're not celebrating Kwanzaa in Africa,
It's true, at the same time, I think we do encourage people to get familiar with what Kwanzaa is, because from the point of view of human growth and development, positive development, it has some very, I believe, some very outstanding values and concepts. And so, yes, it was created here in America, but it's one of those things, in my belief, that it has some great value in terms of its value structure and what it encourages people to do and to believe. I just saw someone who one of the comments that came across, Charles, this one right here, and it's interesting. I think his last line is, "I embrace all of my heritage," which is a situation that the universe has deposited in all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
That is really the entire challenge for us, is to embrace who we are, and then not to deny you who you are.
I have something to say about my good friend for many years, Charles Tadoka Moore. When Abraham Lincoln hung those 39 Santee Sioux Indians out in Minnesota, that was Charles. One of those men was Charles's great grandfather. And Charles and I have been friends for many years. So tragedy has hit everybody in America. And I will tell you this, there's not a people that have come here from anywhere that don't have ancestry that had to deal with some form of slavery. Everybody came to America with some kind of slave. The Irish, they were indentured servants. They had to pay for their passage to get over here. But they treated them different because why? They were a lot lighter than the Africans that they stole and enslaved. So this is a two-standard country, and it's always been one. Now I got some white friends that I wouldn't give up if they were the last people on earth, because they proved themselves to be brothers and sisters, period. Folks, you need to stop demonizing everybody only because of the color of their skin. You need to stop that. You need to start talking to each other instead of at each other. And before you point a finger at anybody, you don't like him because, he's a white guy. Well, find out where his people came from. And then you find out where your folks came from, and you find out the white people that are in your bloodline. Then you may have something to talk about. Other than that, I don't want to hear it.
Tom wanted to know, do Native Americans have a history of owning white slaves? They had a history of slavery if they were part of the 5 civilized tribes, I will tell you that. I don't know if they had a history of owning white slaves. They may have if it came to being Irish or something like that when the Irish came here, who were sold as slaves. But yeah, that could have possibly happened. I don't have any reference to that. Elder might have reference to it.
You remember the Irish famine? You read about it. When Ireland was having a lot of problems. Do you know it was the Choctaw people that actually collected money and food, and they sent it to Ireland for those people to survive? And even to this day, the Irish are ever so thankful for what we did to help them to survive. So folks, get off of this mess. You can't run around pointing fingers at everybody because they don't look like you or act like you or think like you. You got to stop that. When can we have a true and honest dialogue? When can we sit down and talk about this?
But did that happen, though? Do we have any reference to Native American people who owned slaves owning white people?
No.
All right.
No.
I wonder what the root of that question was, though.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I mean, he has questions like that, but I'm trying to educate the brother. So if we do have any reference to it, maybe we can find some reference to that. And people were wanting to know where we're getting our information from. Some of the books that we read, Elder, the book that you brought to look at the tribes in Ohio. Can you reference that book? Or we can put that in post after.
Yeah, after the show.
after the show.
I'll give you references on a lot of books that the strange thing, last week there was an auction going on here in Northern Virginia, and it was an auction of possessions that belonged to um, a man of color. I don't want to use that black word, who was actually an ambassador from the United States government. And in that auction, I'll run and get it in a minute, there was a wedding vase from the Acoma Pueblos. And I couldn't believe what I got it for. This thing has got to be worth at least $1,000 or $2,000. And I went online and bid $10 on it. It's from the Acoma Pueblo people of Arizona.
Hmm.
And the man that made it, he didn't make a lot of stuff, but everything was handmade. So I'm gonna run off for a minute. I'll bring it back and show it to everybody.
All right.
In the meantime, let me, even though I kind of got my ire up a little bit when I saw that question, let me answer that question for him. There is a great amount of history of Native Americans owning white slaves. And I kind of feel why you asked that question, but let me help you straighten it out so that you'll know. There is a lot of it. I mean, look at it, and yeah, it's just a movie, but just because it's a movie doesn't mean that there's not some fact in it. Look at Dances with Wolves, and that will kind of give you an idea. A lot of the settlers that were through the Great Plains, they killed a lot of the parents, but they took the children and kept them as slaves to work in their camps. But then after a time, they were allowed to be a part of the family. But for quite a while, a lot of them that were taken in raids that were not killed were kept as slaves. So the answer to your question is yes.
And can I say this? Slavery in the Native American culture was not the same as slavery in the Caucasian culture. There is a difference. You did your manumission, whatever it would have been, like 3 or 4 years, and then you were adopted into the family. So this happened a lot. Can we see your vase real quick, and then we need to go on to one more question before we wrap up.
This is it. It's from the Acoma Pueblo people in Arizona.
Beautiful.
Signed. So I had to get this.
Beautiful. We'll take great care of it.
Oh, you got that right. This is
how was that used, Jay, with two spouts like that? What was the purpose?
It was a wedding vase. They would fill it with something liquid, and when you got married, the husband and the wife had to do this together from both.
Oh, I see.
To seal their marriage.
I see. Fascinating.
Pillow Talk says that we were always called Negro, which is a definition means dark-skinned people. Yes, that's a Spanish terminology for Black. Negro. Negro means dark-skinned people. It's not synonymous of Africa as the non-Africans of Papua New Guinea and Jarawa and Asia. Absolutely right. And Negro means Black. Negro.
I think they pronounce it as negrito.
Yeah, negro or negrito. It also the word cimarron was also one of the terms that was used for people with dark skin. So let's see. Let's try to wrap it up with one more question. Let me just see. Wow, we've got a lot of questions. Morena, I will, can you actually add, I know that you asked me what book that I read that from. Can you verify what comment that was that I made? And I can tell you what book that is and add it into our post. Let's see. Yeah. I'd like to address this. If you look at old depictions of Europeans who arrived here in America when they came across Native people, if you look at those pictures, we're drawn correctly. We're not drawn as Plains Indians. We are drawn as people of color that were dark and coppered skin. And there are some comments that you can see out there where they actually describe how we looked. Some of us had frizzy hair, some of us had straight hair. But the one thing that was common amongst those depictions of us is that we were of a color, and we were from copper to dark skin.
Go see the mural and the ceiling band around the top floor of the American Indian Museum, and every picture of every face on that top floor was very dark. The red Indian is only a rather recent iteration of what's going on, and that came from mixing with white. It's only like 150 years old. Before that, everybody that was native to here was dark.
Or close to dark.
Amen.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so it looks like we just have like a lot of comments, a lot of discussion going in, and I like that. There's a lot of discussion going on. Thank you so much, you all, for your questions. We will have another fireside chat next month. We can continue that. I know that, Elder, that you're going to come back with a comment about that, and we will add those books and some books for you to read for next time when we come back.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question for you, Leslie.
Yes.
Is that cafe au lait going to be hyphenated, cafe au lait American?
No, it's going to be written as the French do it in those terms, cafe au lait. That's a funny, let me just say that that's really a funny thing, because I want to tell you that I used to be a flight attendant. I was a flight attendant for a major airline for 16 years, an international flight attendant. And I remember that I went to Switzerland. It was my first time ever going to Switzerland. And I was walking out with my crew, and I happened to be the only person of color walking around in my crew. And these European men came down. They were actually from Belgium, walked past me and called me cafe au lait.
Oh, wow.
And thank you so much for your comment, Brooklyn lady. Hey to you too.
Tom Jones he just has one comment. He says the reason that he asked the question was there documentation that people were slaves, that they came over here, and I'm trying to figure out who were the slave masters. Well, unfortunately, we had a lot of people. We had a lot of those people that lived in what we deem as the 5 civilized tribes took on Southern attitudes and ways, and so they did own slaves, and it did happen.
But in most cases, when you talk about the Cherokee,
Thank you.
we would take a lot of these people that ran away from the plantations, and they would be in the forest, and their first instinct was to run back to the ocean and try to commandeer a boat or a vessel to get back home across the ocean. Well, there was no vessel there. They lacked the navigational skills or knew how to get back to where they originated from. So they turned and they ran into the forest, and we took them in. We gave them shelter. We gave them help. We gave them food. We took care of them, basically. So this whole idea about, Indians own slaves. Yeah, when the white slave catchers came looking for them, we would tell them, no, you can't have them. These are our slaves. And that was a form of protection. So, folks, check your facts. Just go and read. Find out what it is that you want to know. And then come to us. And we'll be more than happy to help you. But don't bring me none of this BS, So anyway.
Braveheart, you're very correct. We did own plantations back in the day, and we had people that were sharecropping on their land. And some of the land granted to people of color back in the day were given to them by Native American landowners. This is the case with my family. We were given land. Even though we were Native American, we were sharecropping on that land, and we were given a portion of that land later.
And I got a problem with anybody giving away any land this side of the Atlantic Ocean. You came over here, you killed us, you stole our land, you stole our land rights, and now you got the nerve to want to give it to somebody or sell it to somebody? Please, give me a break.
Yep, you are absolutely right, Braveheart. We've always been here. And we can always claim that we are original people.
And we're not going anywhere.
That's it. So would we like to wrap it up with any comments before we end this evening? We're going a little bit over. I want to thank everybody that was a part of this panel. It has been very, very interesting this evening. And thank you all of our audience members who've been asking questions this evening. Please come back next month when we have our other Fireside Chat. And please, please follow Jay on his radio show that he has on Sunday night on WOLD DC News. Is that right?
Yes.
WOLDCnews.com. Click listen live.
And if you are in the Washington, D.C. area, what is the call name for the radio station?
WOL AM 1450, 95.9 FM and 102.3 HD3.
You sound so professional.
That's why he's my friend. You keep your friends around you for a reason. So before we go, Barry, do you have any closing words? Less than a minute, thoughts?
Not to throw anything in the mix at the last moment, but I was thinking of this discussion of color, and I'm reminded of a good friend of mine, Calvin Rolark, who was one of the founders of the United Black Fund. He and incredible community people, he and Wilhelmina Rolark.
Yes.
Calvin, when describing his community and our community, Calvin would say, well, Barry, we're everything from Mongolian yellow to Dewberry black. That's what our community is.
But hey, Barry, don't give up any good stuff before Sunday.
So I just want to thank you guys for, I really learned a lot tonight. And I want to thank you, Jay, for inviting me to the show. And Leslie, always a joy to participate in such a robust and important discussion. And I look forward to the next time we get an opportunity to get that. I'd love to see some of the questions, by the way. If you could get me some of the questions and some of the comments people have made, I'd love to review that. But thanks very much for all the opportunity you've given me to share my thoughts and to learn as much as I can tonight. Thanks all.
Oh, absolutely, Barry. You're a brother forever. And to my very good friend, David Martin. David, do you have any closing thoughts on this tonight?
Well, thank you. It was a learning experience. There are nuances and shades, no pun intended, that I was completely unaware of, and it's really thought-provoking, especially as someone who has never looked up his own heritage. I have no idea if I'm English, Irish, German. I think I'm probably not Ethiopian, but except for that, I don't know what I am. So I feel that that's a lacking now. And listening to you folks, I feel like I have left out a part of my self-knowledge. So again, all these things were very, very enlightening. Thank you.
I'll tell you, like my grandma used to say, you better go ask somebody. Ramon Grimaldi, my good friend and brother for many, many years. Closing thoughts, and not 5 minutes worth either. I couldn't.
Yes, sir. No, but this is something important that I do want to say. David, you remember back when you were Jay's executive producer, it was the American Indians Truths, the most dangerous show on radio. And yes, that's when I first heard it, like 23 years ago. I didn't want to get rid of that hook and that tagline, and I fought Jay on it. And I'm like, okay, you're going with the human family. You're covering Black issues. You're covering Asian issues. You're covering all kinds of issues. But an American Indian show is what made you special, and you need to hold on to that. I fought him when he came with the concept, we're going to cover the human family. And then we had a discussion a few weeks ago, and it's like, okay, the 360 degrees of the human family's experience. I fought you, brother. Yep, I fought you. I was wrong. You were right. And I wanted to say that widely because you'll never hear it again. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
I still love you, Ramon. You're my bro.
That's a lot for Ramon.
You have to, because okay, your mama is my mama.
Yeah, somebody rush a thermometer over there.
Yeah, definitely.
My COVID test was negative, so forget it.
Leslie, you got any closing thoughts?
My closing thoughts are always my closing thoughts. You all, please educate yourself. Just don't listen to anybody. Just don't listen to this panel. Just don't listen to anybody out there that's giving you that information. It's important to do your research for yourself. Behind this green screen is a library, literally, of all the books that I have read. And after I've read a book, I match it with another book because I don't always believe what somebody puts in a book. I need to have evidence of that. But one thing that I have realized is finding out who I really am has been life-changing. It has been life-changing. It is an experience. And I no longer put myself down as Black or African-American. I also put myself as other because it starts with me. The knowledge that I give other people, the change in how people identify me, the terms that were given to identify me changes with me. And if I walk that walk, then people will know who I am. So I just, encourage you to read, to have knowledge. Just don't believe anything, and unify yourselves with one of people. People have a different approach to finding out who they are. You may not be wrong, but sit down and have a conversation with somebody. You don't have to argue. You don't have to banter. You don't have to be on separate sides of the world or, fighting each other, dueling about stuff. Sit down and listen to other people's perspectives because sometimes it might be true.
Yeah. Thank you, Leslie. I just love you to death. I don't care what Sean says. Okay.
Love you too.
Everybody's got their side to whatever they think. And believe me, as long as you're not wrong, then you're entitled to have your thoughts. But the problem comes in when you start to think that you're better than somebody else or that you know more than somebody else. Well, maybe you do, but you don't have to browbeat people with that. Just sit down and have a conversation. It's not about the color of your skin or the color of your eyes or the texture of your hair. It's not about the clothes you wear, and it's certainly not about your traditions and your culture. What it's really all about, as my grandfather used to always say, is how you treat my heart. That's what it's all about. So we can have a heart-to-heart conversation. Then that's a start to something very successful. I just want to let you all know that I love you all of you, even those of you that make it almost impossible to love. I love you in spite of yourself. We'll be back again next week, same time, right here on YouTube and Facebook Live. And there's a bunch of other medias that are carrying us too. Winter Nightwolf Live. That's where you find me every Wednesday night, waiting for you to join me. Talk to you next week. Until then, Dana da, go ahi, wado. I love you all. Take care.